Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Live and on tape from Cultura Media House. Presented to you by 786 Sports. It's El Big League Show. Now batting, Adrian Lorenzo.
Junior, I don't think I'll ever get tired of that intro. I think I'm going to enjoy that one every time. What's up, guys? Adrian Lorenzo here. Welcome back to El Big League Show. This is our third episode here, and doing a little bit of a different one today. Danny Enriquez, my co-host, is traveling in Asia. I think he's in Japan today. And so doing this one solo, but still wanted to make sure to come in and continue the episode, get a process going where we keep recording anyway, and we find something compelling to talk about every week and find a way to give you guys something every single week here. So this week, I thought it'd be appropriate to do an episode that's a bit of a zoom out. You know, I don't want this show to become something where we're just spotlighting the best things that happen in that individual week. I wanted to have the flexibility to spotlight things that we just liked overall, spotlight things that stood out to us. And as we were preparing and in the prep for this episode, and thinking about which organization to spotlight. In week 1, we did the Red Sox. In week 2, we did the Yankees. And this week, the Arizona Diamondbacks stand out from an organizational standpoint. The Athletic put out an article not too long ago here, and where they ranked all the front offices in baseball. And the Arizona Diamondbacks came in within the top 10. I believe they were number 7, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that was appropriate and also worthy of being spotlighted, because I think the Arizona Diamondbacks have been doing things for at a really high level for a pretty long time now, and I think that starts from the top, from their front office. I think Mike Hazen is, I think I've mentioned it before, he's one of, if not the best lead baseball executives in all of baseball. He's the general manager with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and I think he's exceptional, and I think for more reasons than just he's a good guy, which he very much is. But also, I think he just handles all the things that a general manager needs to handle really, really well. And he's installed a system of people behind him as well that are also among the highest caliber in baseball. So I started to think, what makes a quality front office? What makes a quality general manager? And why does Mike Hazen fit as one of those? And I think the job of a general manager in baseball is so comprehensive. It's so multifaceted. It's so layered. Like, if you sit down and bullet all the things you need to know, do, be well-versed in as a general manager, you basically can't be out of depth in any conversation that has anything to do with anything on a baseball field, in a baseball front office, in an ownership meeting, in a community meeting. You just have to be well-versed in all these things. And I think why the term general manager is appropriate, because you're just managing so many different things. But what are the things that we evaluate a general manager on, right? What are the public or an ownership group or other front offices themselves? Like, what would make it so that you'd get a favorable ranking in one of these situations? And I think the Arizona Diamondbacks have a lot of good reasons for that. So one of the main responsibilities, and the primary one, of a president of baseball operations or a chief baseball officer or whatever the lead baseball executive is to manage the baseball operations department, which is super layered itself. So within that baseball operations department is a major league team and staff of players and staff, all your scouting departments, your player development department, your research and development, your analytics. These are the ones I just named are just 5 of the many departments that a baseball operations umbrella covers. And you have to do all of these things well. And when these things are all moving in synchrony, then you're at your best. And I think the Diamondbacks have a good argument. Like, starting with their major league club, they have a good, strong major league club, an exciting team with offense, with pitching, with defense. They're just fun to watch. Despite having the 13th highest payroll in baseball, I think the 13th payroll right now is $195 million. with the minimum being 70. So they kind of rank right in the middle of a pack in terms of payroll, but in terms of processes, I'd argue they're ranked higher than middle of the pack. But the biggest problem for them right now is the fact that they're in the NL West. The NL West this year in 2025 could have 4 playoff teams come out of the same division between the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, and the Diamondbacks themselves, who will be in contention. So they start from a kind of a tough place to start because you're not in a favorable division right now in this day and age. The NL West, it may very well be the best division in baseball. So starting from there, they're still as competitive a team as any team in baseball right now, and as any team in that division. And I think that starts from just a really solid management of all the departments in a baseball operation. But then flipping it over to the major league team, your players have to be good, but then also your general manager to manager relationship is an underrated discussion point in baseball. I think that relationship, the general manager and the manager, or the president of baseball operations and the manager, I think most seasoned executives that have been in those spots would tell you that that's arguably the most important relationship in the entire organization, in addition to the relationship that the general manager has with the owner or whoever the lead point person is on the ownership side. And I think with Torey, Lovullo, Mike Hazen has arguably one of the best and most complementary partners of any duo in baseball. I think these guys have been together for, I don't even know how many years, but back when Torey Lovullo was a manager in the minor leagues in Cleveland and Mike Hazen was a farm director, assistant farm director back in the Cleveland days. This is before they went on to work together with the Red Sox again, where Torey Lovullo was the bench coach for the Red Sox, and Mike Hazen was assistant GM and GM with the Red Sox. To then now, full circle, zooming all the way out to 2025, they've been at this for quite a while now too, as a duo, as a GM-manager duo that I think has had some staying power in the game, and that's rare. You're not really ever talking about that duo, and I think the Diamondbacks have that, and it's a part of their magic. It's a part of their success. I think Torey Lovullo deserves a lot of flowers as being one of the better humans in baseball, but definitely one of the better managers in baseball, especially when it comes to player relationships and player engagement and interaction. My first foray with Torey was back in 2016 with the Boston Red Sox, where I was the Major League replay tech, and Torey Lovullo was the other person on the other side of the phone as the bench coach in Boston. So I got to know Torey really well and actually talked to him a lot in-game because of this replay tech bench coach dynamic, where he would basically call me on any play and say, what do you got? And have to give him an answer with conviction and with speed, and you'll see those decisions play out in the game. And so I cut my teeth with Torey there, and I can tell you that in that position where I was so young and green, he found a way to get the best performance out of me, who was just a sack of nerves, especially in the beginning when we did it. But he's the type of personality that found a way to still hold me accountable, like display a high degree of baseball knowledge and high degree of preparation, but also understand that it wasn't an easy job that I was doing, and that it was a high leverage, high stakes thing that we were doing then. So having that perspective and seeing it play out for Torey as a major league manager, I'm not surprised that he's one of the better ones in baseball. But so that's major league staff, right? Like that's one check mark on their behalf. But then you go onto their roster and you'll see that 20 of their players are totally homegrown. So 20 of the players on their 40-man roster, at least half, are homegrown with all the different departments contributing. So the one that stands out the most here in this case is their amateur scouting department. So baseball operations departments, when you think of scouting, don't think of it as one large scouting department. These departments are usually broken up into sectors. So one being, when you say amateur scouting, you're really covering the draft and any player in Canada, Puerto Rico, the U.S. territories. That's what you traditionally consider amateur scouting for the draft. And in that department, I think they've done exceptionally well. They've been scouting really well for a while, and I think you see some of those products on the major league field, like Corbin Carroll is a scouted Arizona Diamondback drafted player, Brandon Pfaadt, Pavin Smith, Alec Thomas, even a guy contributing now, Tim Tawa. The list could go on and on of players that they've drafted and developed and are impacting their major league club right now. So that's one leg of the table that's really strong. Another leg of the table is their pro scouting department. So pro scouting versus amateur scouting is scouting the other not the other front offices, the other systems in baseball. You're basically scouting all 29 other teams so that when you match up in a trade or in a trade possibility, you've got reports and layers of information on that other team. So that's the pro scouting department, which to this point has also yielded exceptional results for them. You think about Zach Gallen for Jazz Chisholm. You think about right now Josh Naylor is having a tremendous season, and they were able to use one of the players they drafted in Slade Ciccone to acquire a Josh Naylor to make their major league club good. Like I said, Pavin Smith. Ketel Marte in a trade with Seattle, as well as Eugenio Suarez in another trade with Seattle. So in another area where you see that their scouting, and in this particular instance, their pro scouting, is allowing them the opportunity to make trades for impactful players that can make direct impact right now to your major league roster, right? And then they also have the other leg of the table standing pretty strong with their international contributions. So I listed amateur, I listed pro, and now I'm listing another version of amateur, which is the international Latin America and Asian scouting processes, which to this point have yielded Geraldo Perdomo, who I think is one of the best shortstops in all of baseball, period, right now. That's an original Arizona Diamondbacks international signee. Justin Martinez, another Arizona Diamondbacks original signee. So you got the amateur, pro, and international layers all contributing players, as well as a really strong Asian process or Asian league process on the pro side to be able to identify and sign a Merrill Kelly, who's been a staple in that rotation for the last few years, and they signed him out of a strong season in the KBO. So not only are they scouting the U.S. well, only are they scouting Latin America well, but they're also scouting other teams well and the other Asian leagues well. So they just really stand out as this really comprehensively built organization that I think is built to last for a while here. So that's one area. You got to be good at managing your major league staff, managing your major league players, managing your scouting departments to be able to make major league moves. But then you also got to find a way to keep these guys around. And that's where, on the extension side, that's where I think a front office can really stand out. And you can evaluate them on how many of their players are they retaining to longer term extensions that are not just true free agency spend, which they also do, as we'll talk about in a bit. But I think the thing to point out here is their ability to identify players that they really believe in early on and sign them to team-friendly extensions. Corbin Carroll, Brandon Pfaadt, Geraldo Perdomo, Ketel Marte after a big year. Justin Martinez, who they just signed to an extension. I think we're in this new era, this new phase of younger players being offered long-term extensions and more money on the front end to buy out their arbitration years and maybe a few of their free agency years. And I think the Diamondbacks are kind of leading the way with that. When Corbin Carroll signed his deal not too long ago, it was one of the first ones for a player with such little service time, but they had high belief in the player and pulled the trigger on it. It's looking like a really good decision. He looks like a top 5 player in baseball right now. And as an Arizona Diamondback fan and follower, that player is going to be with you for a while. And I think that kudos to a team for believing in that and for believing in that process to give your fans this longer window of belief in the club with these longer term extensions, as opposed to trying to run it back with a different club every year, which is hard to do. And then the final piece to it, to me, is your ability to also complement your team with free agents, right? So like they went out and signed a big fish in Corbin Burns this year, and they went out and signed Eduardo Rodriguez as well. And last year they took a swing at Jordan Montgomery. But all the things I mentioned right before this point were all more in the direction of efficiency and saving and kind of more businessy type of moves. But this right here, free agency, spending on a Corbin Burns, is playing in the big fish, in the big boy pool in terms of free agency. So it's a team doing a lot of things really well, and I thought that they deserved the spotlight. And so it feels appropriate to give the Arizona Diamondbacks, Mike Hazen, Torey Lovullo, and everybody over there involved a hat tip of the week from El Big League Show, because in terms of the things that I value as a former front office person, I look at the Arizona Diamondbacks and I'm like, okay, I really like a lot of the things that they do here. And while they may not stand out in payroll, they stand out in all these other ways that provide a lot of value and value for a pocket of time, not just for the short term. And then for our next segment, our prospect spotlight of the week, which we've been doing every week. There's one player that stands out among all rookies right now, and it's Kameron Misner of the Tampa Bay Rays. Kameron Misner leads all MLB rookies in WAR and WRC+, and is a big part of the reason the Tampa Bay Rays are playing as well as they're playing. He's contributed offensively, contributed defensively, contributed base running wise, and I'm so happy to see this for Kameron. I happened to be in the draft room when we drafted Kameron Misner. I believe he was the 35th pick that draft, and we drafted J.J. Bleday, number 4 overall that year, and then Kameron Misner as well. It's interesting that both of these players are no longer with the Marlins, but they were used in trades to bolster those Marlins clubs at the time. But I actually saw those two players on the same day at a game in Vanderbilt and had those two guys match up against each other. And so it was really interesting that we would later go on to pick both of those players. But what stands out about Kameron Misner from that draft time is how excited we were that he was available at 35. So we felt that we were picking between some version of a polished college left-handed bat, and that both J.J. Bleday and Kameron Misner fell into that category. So a lot of the conversation was based around, I wish we could sign both of these guys because we like both of them. And in this case, thanks to what I thought was really good pre-draft preparation and conversation with Misner's agents and with Bleday's agents, and to be able to have an idea of what deal could be had and what amount of money could be agreed upon, to be able to be in a position to select J.J. Bleday at number 4, and then feel like you can still do some things and save some money in later rounds of the draft to also select Kameron Misner with the 35th selection. And that's what we were able to do. And it's a good feeling in those draft rooms when you select somebody and the whole room gets excited because you feel like you were counting picks to see if that player that you wanted would be available at that spot. And in that draft, he was. So it's really interesting to see a player having his moments as a rookie in the major leagues, when my process with him was the amateur process and everything that preceded the minor leagues. And then he goes on and gets traded in the middle of his minor league career, so you don't get to see the rest of that progression. But kudos to Cam for being one of the better rookies in baseball right now. Yeah. Sheesh. So I thought that would be a good spotlight and a good segue into perhaps the next part of this conversation, which is a pre-recorded conversation that I had a few months ago with Dan Greenlee, former assistant general manager with the Miami Marlins and worked with the New York Yankees for a while before that. As of right now, Dan is in a special advisor role with the San Francisco Giants. But when we had this conversation, he was in the period between those two, the Marlins and Giants roles. And we had one of my favorite baseball conversations that I've ever had, at least on camera. Dan and I would have a lot of those types of conversations in a war room, in a trade room, in a deadline room all the time. But this was the first time we were able to make one of those conversations more available to the public. So since I don't have Danny here with me today, I think this is a good time to work this conversation in and this series of integration of conversations into this show. So I think that's what we'll do next year.
Yeah, so I'm excited to be able to have this grouping or this conversation here, because this idea has existed so long in my head of having discussions at a level that I felt I was privy to when I was working in professional baseball that have since subsided just because the platform or the premise isn't there. And so when I thought of first episodes or first things to talk about or people to speak with, Dan, you stand out right away. You're somebody who I respect about as highly as I could respect anybody in the game. And I miss the conversations we used to have, and I think this gives us a chance to have some version of that. So I'm excited to jump in on different things. Given that the podcast is a team building in a team building direction, I kind of want to lock in on some themes and processes that we could elaborate on in that direction of team building in particular, but maybe taking a player personnel kind of transactionally driven approach to it. Is that a fair characterization, Danny?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where do you think we could start here?
Start with Dan.
Yeah, maybe we just do a quick like how you're sitting here, like in your baseball journey. So you didn't start in baseball, right? It's not a sport that you grew up playing necessarily.
No, so I guess I started box score, newspaper, fantasy baseball with my dad, and like just an obsession with the sport without being any good at the sport, and then ended up doing law school, quarter life crisis, worked in a movie store, wrote about baseball, wound up interning for the Yankees, worked for the Yankees in player development, and then came over to the Marlins and worked in a few different facets, a lot involving player personnel until my dismissal this year. So,
got it. So your formal professional baseball journey starts with the New York Yankees organization, but your
Yes.
interest in baseball kind of far precedes that. Fair?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's
So-
always been a glue piece for family and
Right.
stuff like that.
Dan, let me ask you about the writing part, because I've seen that come up more in baseball, and that's not common in other sports where you go from writing about a sport to affecting the outcome, right? So what did you write, and how did that impact your career?
So I think that's important for people looking to get into baseball, is some kind of demonstrated evidence for clubs that you have that level of interest to sit down and actually focus on something and produce something. So I ended up writing a single article that was accepted by Fangraphs in their community section involving pitcher defense and how FIP and XFIP and these measures, which are great in predicting pitcher performance, just didn't happen to incorporate pitcher defense and their ability to hold runners, which is not a huge piece of the puzzle, but when you're looking to kind of capture every piece of the puzzle, it's definitely worthwhile.
Sure. So that's the segue into the Yankees internship. That's kind of like the proof of I know what I'm talking about. To be granted, the probably very low salary internship that you started your baseball career with.
Yeah,
Mine as well.
I know what I'm talking about. Might be a little strong, but I'm ready to do work, and I'm highly interested. And I think demonstrating those two things are important to clubs for sure.
So getting into the internship process, which I'd like to break that down just a little bit, because I think some people think intern and they think intern to the larger overall entity. I think with an organization like the Yankees, that's such a well-oiled, layered machine, you were an intern within a specific department and probably working on specific projects within that department, right? Is that fair at first? And you were in player development.
I was in analytics in the stadium for 1 year in 2013.
Okay.
And we were mostly, charting hand time, home to first times, and stuff like that on video, and giving stadium tours and stuff of that nature. So
when did it get more player focused?
Player development was the following year. I landed a full-time job down there, placed in Tampa in their player development, and all of a sudden you're working with players up close and coaches up close in a really intimate way, which was huge to learning about the game, kind of really hands-on.
Sure. I'm really fortunate that my first foray into professional baseball was a player development internship at the complex level in Fort Myers, and that it shaped the way I think about baseball forever, taking a player development approach. So it sounds like in a lot of our discussions that we've had, they're mostly player development discussions, like process and player development. So what do you remember taking from that, like those first years with the Yankees? Like what do you feel like you were able to, later in your career when you went elsewhere, okay, these are the things that I feel are valuable to try to replicate?
Yeah, so I think, more things than I can count or say. I think when I was sitting in a room in purely analytics, like through that lens as a 28-year-old just starting in baseball, that you have kind of all the answers in your scope, if that's a spreadsheet or whatever else. I guess in player development, like I gained a wider appreciation for all the things that go into player evaluation, and the changes and the forecasting of players that kind of extend beyond that. You kind of learn how much you don't know, and a heightened appreciation for that, a heightened appreciation for a lot of the human elements of the game that are very real.
Dan, let me ask you, working with players directly, your athletic background is on the football side, right? How was that dealing with these, top of the line players when you yourself didn't go through what they went through? Is that something you had to overcome confidence-wise?
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody has to a large percentage of folks coming from the analytics side of the game have to grapple with that. And, you haven't been in these players' shoes, and you've never been that caliber of star in anywhere, in any sport, right? And then especially in baseball. So, relating to those people takes a lot of humility, and also takes, you really have to get to know people to be in a position to help them or introduce things that might be foreign to how they currently think or do things.
I think player development allows you to, it forces you to see how human this game is at the end of the day, because you can have all the best philosophies, all the best advanced information, but it's still the human being that has to process and execute in real time. And I think when working in player development, you see how steep the climb is and how gradual some of the steps are. And it just, I don't know, grew a deep appreciation for how difficult the minor league journey is, especially when you start at the complex level, how long the journey is and how many things you have to clear to get there. And it's a deeply human game, no matter how much we try to analyze or add layers of data to make better information, which we should. But if you can overcomplicate a process and then think you got the best solution, but then if the player doesn't process it, or if that delivery right at the very end, that funnel to the player, fumbles that process or it isn't clear, you can lose all the effort that you made on the front end just by the delivery to the player who doesn't process what's happening. And I think it's fascinating to me, and that's why I think player development I'm glad that's where I cut my teeth first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were at the Yankees, you were involved in one of the all-time player development success stories, which was Aaron Judge. Not a Bryce Harper, not a Ken Griffey where he's 1-1 and everybody expected what we see now. Talk about just the experience with Aaron Judge from the beginning. We know how it turned out, but take us back to how it was at the time and what maybe some of the perceptions from outside your building were and the things that you knew you had to overcome.
So he's drafted when and you enter when?
Boy, he's drafted 2014. Maybe 2014 or 15. And
so he's a first-year player in the Yankees organization, and your first year working in player development.
First year full-time somewhere. I can't remember.
Gotcha. So you've gotten to see the whole arc.
Well, yeah.
So that's where I find a lot of the interest and the value, because he gets picked in the back of the first round.
He gets picked. You know what? He might have been, I don't know, is he 13 or 14
Okay. Yeah, we'll pull this up now, but
he's right there. He's at the start. He's certainly in the lower levels when I get to the Yankees. I think you learn something from every player and every coach and every person you're involved with in baseball. And there were a lot of lessons that you learned through Aaron Judge that are unmistakable. And, some of that is outcome bias, I'm sure, but some of that is some of it was right in your face, and he's different. If you say it factor, you would have assigned it, no matter what had happened, you would have assigned it to him in that moment, laser focused determination and just a maturity that made grown men introspective. He just was different, right? And then you couple that with physical tools that were out of this world. I remember a time with the Yankees where if you had said I did say the ball comes off, this is kind of the infancy of exit velocities and logging these and bringing these up, and you're the ball comes off the bat like Stanton. I mean, there's nobody else like it, and you're oh, you just said you can't say that about a guy in A ball. That is so far-fetched, and these egregious comps, and over time, it became much less egregious. But I think the makeup of the player coupled with a very coherent player development plan on the offensive side, and this was a recipe for obviously huge success that traced back to the person himself.
he was the 32nd pick in the draft in the Comp A round, and he was actually the Yankees' second pick in that draft. Eric Jagielo was selected ahead of Aaron Judge in their own, like Aaron Judge was the Yankees' second pick there. They went Jagielo and Judge, 26, and then Judge picked 32. So that's interesting to me because a guy with seeming outward, to me, this is one that a scout stuffs in his report and probably points, there's probably some glaring swing and miss issue in this case to have you slide with those tools down to this part of the draft, right? Because he was a college player with power performance. It's interesting that he slides given some names ahead of this, that got selected before 32 here that wouldn't, in my opinion, have jumped out tools-wise compared to Aaron Judge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think the other piece, I think there was some swing and miss, but also it was a lower trajectory, like impact. So, the impact was otherworldly then, and
right.
The minute he showed up, you're watching
angle,
BP, you're like, oh my goodness. But it was a little bit more doubles than home run power at that time, and it was an easy translation with a little bit more loft to, the type of outward home run type seasons that he's having now, because he always had the raw impact.
Sure. What were some of the early obstacles? Like, okay, your first foray into pro ball, Aaron Judge. What are some of the first red flags that pop up?
I think guys with like longer limbs and just taller players generally, like the acclimation period is slower than a short-limbed, like just super hitterish guy who's like kind of plug and play in relatively speaking, anyways.
Is it a path to the ball thing?
Yeah, I think you just have more to control and harness to hit today's caliber pitching when you got longer limbs and you're a bigger guy. So it's not like short
arms help you stay inside the ball better. Is it that simple?
Yeah, I think it's just easier to get your barrel to the ball with the shorter arm guys. So
big guys like that have to work against that. Let's not call it a deficiency, but getting inside of a baseball is easier if there's less space or if you have more space.
Yeah, you don't see many guys Aaron Judge's size in the big leagues, and I think that's for a reason.
Right.
And you see more Bregmans and this type of build out there because it's hard to be a man that big and successfully contact, and barrel up.
Yep.
Balls that are, the quality of stuff that he's seeing. So.
And then to me, what impresses me about him, and I wonder where he takes this jump, like swing decisions, right? I think he makes excellent swing decisions and sees the ball really good, and I think it really adds to him maximizing all those offensive tools and overcoming some of the swing and miss. Like even though there's some swing and miss, the on base or the ability to get on base is high enough. And then actually, because swing decisions aren't limited to just do you draw walks or not, do you capitalize on the pitch that you need to capitalize when you see it to be able to do your damage and put up your numbers. Where does he take that step from a swing decision standpoint in that arc?
So I think the swing decisions were always pretty good. There was like a moment in time where he wasn't slugging on non-fastballs, which was like a little bit of a topic, and it was like, but he wasn't chasing non-fastballs. And when I reference James Rowson was our hitting coordinator at that time and had a very coherent explanation for how he's going to, he already identifies these pitches, but this is how he's going to get in position to punish those pitches. And he has the physical tools to punish anything and everything. Right. But like physically, he was falling into his front side at the time, and there was a progression that was going to get him able to ride that out a little bit better and do more damage on those pitches.
So the encouraging nugget in that, if like on the development arc, is that he may not be slugging against breaking balls or secondary right now, but at least he's not chasing them out of the zone for that swing and miss, which is a fundamental difference, right? Like I've seen guys' careers end because they can't not chase the breaking ball down away, and it doesn't let you access the things you're actually good at, because in the big leagues you just kind of they're going to double down on that area of weakness.
Yeah.
So if you could just at least not chase it or make a decision to not swing at it, that's what I'm saying about swing decisions. Where does he take that next leap? And it sounds like it's somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think that part was in place, which made it much more persuasive that he was going to be able to get to that finish line than if it had not been in place.
Yeah.
Dan, let me ask you about the player development plan, because you've mentioned this a couple of times, that it was a coherent, clear player development plan. What's an example, and you don't have to say a player attached to it, but of maybe a less coherent plan and how you can get in trouble there, and then contrast to what Judge actually had?
Yeah, I think, Adrian, I think touches on swing decisions sometimes is, if that's, mental, if that's, issues with eyesight or whatever else. Like there are certain things that are harder, that there's reason to be less optimistic you're going to be able to improve those traits. And then there's, hey, like this player's not in a physical position to do a certain thing. If it's a leaky front side and, that's notoriously difficult to fix and shore up, like you still might not be optimistic. But if there's a mechanical issue that seems to be well spelled out by a coach with a plan of attack to remedy that issue, like falling into your front side or something like that, I think that's a lot of times that's outside the scope of people's models or thoughts about a player that can be advantageous to know. And player development people, you always hear plans to fix players and remedy players, and some of those plans are more convincing than others. And especially when you can really map out and see, okay, this is how we're going to get this player into this physical position, and that's going to address a current ailment of the player statistically or performance-wise. There's good, sound reason to be more excited about the player, and turned out to be a super exciting player in Judge's case.
And I think it opens up the door to talk about the level of sophistication within some of these processes, right? Some of the better run organizations now, everything that you talked about, it isn't just a hitting coach involved in it. There's a whole R&D department with a biomechanical consideration, and there's a strength and conditioning. So maybe the deficiency where maybe in another generation we saw that deficiency as a swing mechanic deficiency. In this day and age, we see it more as a biomechanical strength and conditioning, pliability, increasing mobility or explosion or, pelvic thrust and things like that to bridge that gap now. And I think organizations that do that well are ahead of the game. And I think they're bunched in the postseason right now, actually. The organizations that are in the postseason are the organizations chasing those advantages, and that their processes are comprehensively intertwined. Because one thing is to say, okay, that's the right strength and conditioning fix to this. This is the right medical plan to implement said strength and conditioning. And the hitting coach says this is the right, mechanical fix. Okay, now get those three things on the same plane, get aligned there, and then present to the player. Some organizations do that in a way that's reachable to the player. Other organizations kind of think in all those directions and do the work. But then again, the filtering to the player is where, to me, the ultimate delivery method is really important, especially when you cross another language.
Dan, you mentioned Stanton because that was the comp that you could see with Aaron Judge at a young age. Obviously, the physical comp, everything else. One thing that jumps out, both guys, Stanton was a second-round pick, Aaron Judge, 32nd pick. So even though someone looking at him is going to say, a kid's going to say, yeah, that's the best player because of the way they look, there was considerable doubt with the projection that they weren't the first overall pick or top 10 pick. But one thing that jumps out with those two, multi-sport, basketball, football, and baseball, competitive at the high school level. So not just, when they're 10, they're 18, 17 years old playing these sports at a high level. Does that factor into the projection at all when you're talking about someone that can be developed and there's some meat on the bone?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's an area that's easy to gloss over and ignore because it's not easily captured. But these players' backgrounds, especially when they're just acclimating to pro ball, these guys come from, some guys played on the circuit the whole time, some guys not at all. Some guys are from very remote areas and never see velocity or anything resembling velocity, but they're two-sport players with all the mechanics and body ability in the world. And other guys are just much more conditioned to hit the ground running based on the type of competition they've seen since they were 13 years old on the circuit or whatever, and full-time baseball type guys. So I do think there's a very wide range of backgrounds that players are coming from that are very hard to capture, and it's one of the explanations for, I think successful projection at the lower levels for some clubs versus others, because it takes a lot of legwork to kind of gather and consider all of that type of information.
You know what stands out when you say that is I remember you telling me a story about going out to Oregon to watch Corbin Carroll. And I remember being on this kick about big physical athletes and players. And Dan comes back from somewhere in Oregon. He had just gotten rained on to watch a high school game. And it was Corbin Carroll who the target was. and he was raving about Corbin Carroll. I was like, dude, we're not going to pick that guy. Like, we're going for this whole thing. And turns out, years later, Corbin Carroll is, Corbin Carroll. But that I don't know why that jumps out to me in this instance. Like, it was the Oregon, like the cold weather. You don't know where to slot him in, like high school wise, kid from that part of the country. Like, where is that apples to apples with South Florida, Texas, or even like some of the college level players that you're assessing? But sometimes it's the right move to reach down into those semi-unknown scouting areas because they probably had a lot of good process information. I'm sure the Diamondbacks loved him.
Yeah, I mean tools through the roof, and it's another one you can get sucked into the body size and be maybe, I guess as it turns out, deceived into thinking the player's limited in some way, but the tools would suggest as it turns out, the player is not especially limited. So he's little guys with big tools have made money and some hay for some people.
So maybe I'll use that as a segue into the Bertman, into John Birdie, because I feel like he's relevant right now because he's a significant part of a postseason team, and he's I think he's one of my favorite baseball transaction stories of 29-year-old minor league free agent, 28-year-old minor league free agent, which for people who don't know, there's minor league free agency and there's major league free agency. Major league free agency applies to anybody on a 40-man or a 26-man roster, whereas minor league free agency is for those players that are off of that 40-man roster. And John Birdie was we were tasked to like gather lists of players to target in minor league free agency to then try to entice for them to sign with you. You explain the opportunity. It's recruiting, and with some some salary figures, but everybody's kind of mostly apples to apples. So you're explaining opportunities, and this is where you're making up ground on the edges of your roster, right? Some of these minor league deals turn into major league deals, and John Birdie was in that scramble of looking at hundreds of players, but perhaps like older for the level, still stuck in Double-A at that point, right, with the Blue Jays, and he's a minor league free agent. And I remember Dan specifically. Actually, he was the only reason I saw him on that list that he stood out. But it was a player that, despite like when you watch him, it doesn't stand out. He had a lot of underlying features across the board, not just offensive, but base running, defensive versatility and stuff that made him, I think, your favorite player at that point. Even versus some of the major league free agents, I think you were more excited about John Birdie.
He's an easy one to like. I didn't have him playing first base in the ALCS on my bingo card, but
right,
but you just don't put anything past him. And I think that's another kind of a trap a little bit sometimes is to, I think base rates are healthy, like having a prior of, hey, guys in Double-A who spent the vast majority of their season in Double-A, New Hampshire at 28 years old, and go on to accrue 7 more, the odds are almost 0%, right? And if you get too attached to that, being attached to that is probably healthy most of the time, but I think you still have to be able to be readied for the exceptions. And there was an argument that player was more advanced than the placement, the Double-A placement, New Hampshire, and if you knew the other things about John, and I think we just learned more and more even by having him. I mean, it's 80 makeup, 70 to 80 base stealing and run, versatility, absolute through the roof. Will do quite obviously anything that you ask him to do, including play
Makes
first
good swing
base.
decisions.
Swing decisions, offensive track record, went to Bowling Green State University, like both my parents. So,
so obviously puts it all gets more clear now.
They became exceedingly clear for me. And
I remember him being really interesting because, like, when you watched it as a scout, if you're like a stylistically leaning baseball aesthetic, which I don't know that I am that, but I've grown from that to not be fixed on that. He doesn't jump out from the group, but then, man, if every game that he was in a lineup, there wasn't some positive contribution in multiple facets of the game where you're like, okay, he's got to find his way into this alignment somehow, if that's left field, if that's second base, if that's third base, and even to the point where he was playing shortstop regularly, and I was like, there's no, like, this doesn't look like what I've been trained to look for. But at the end of the day, the post-game defensive reports would come out, and he crushed like range in that game. Like his lateral coverage and out conversion was I don't want to say elite, but enough to put him in a category where it's like, okay, it justifies him being in a major league lineup and being in a prominent spot in a major league lineup. And I think when he was in those spots and when John Birdie was going and getting on base, that's where some of the better Marlins teams were, in my opinion.
How do you get makeup information on like a 29-year-old minor league free agent? What's the process for getting that kind of information?
Yeah, there's a lot of boots on the ground.
Joe Carroll.
Yeah, we had a scout and executive, Joe Carroll, who was you have some people who have like really deep networks and are just super diligent about getting good information. So Joe was always tremendous at that. So you lean on, I think, some particular folks at times of need. But generally speaking, scouts, it's one of the kind of duties of the job is, you're sitting next to video personnel behind home plate with the other team who might speak kind of freely about players. It's hard to get the real scoop on players because there's a lot of directives to speak positively about your inventory because, of course, right? Yeah. But some scouts are pretty good at getting the real scoop on players and best understanding players before they come through the door.
Yeah, and there's a lot of movement of people that have worked in other organizations, and so if they're coming from that organization, they usually get polled on what they saw there, things that stood out. And if you're considering a player from another organization and a staff member has previous history there, you'll kind of go there. So there's not one place to go get centralized makeup information, and it's all word of mouth and a big game of phone call or telephone, I should say. So I think it's one of the looser areas that we as an industry have a grasp of, but it's interesting all the different ways in which you gather that info. And how much emphasis is placed. Like, it's interesting that some guys are, get tagged as great makeup and then the live situation is different, and other guys that get tagged the opposite and then they show up and play for you and like, this is great. So it's, to me, that one, the makeup side is more hit or miss in terms of like conviction with the information you're getting. It's only so solid that information can be because like it's hard to know. So I think a lot of the times makeup is you're not flying blind, but you can only cover so much.
Yeah, I guess with the divorce rate, what it is in this country, it's evaluating makeup is hard for everybody, right?
For a large swath.
It's not just a baseball problem.
Yeah. So okay, so I think this might be a good time to get into like one of the trades that you and I found particularly fascinating as we're watching contemporary Major League Baseball, which is. It came up because I asked you if you knew like how Michael King was connected to the Miami Marlins having Luzardo and Ryan Weathers, who both look to feature prominently in this rotation for the Marlins or somebody's rotation. Kind of two cases of established value. But I asked you if you knew they were connected to Michael King through the whole web of that trade, and I thought that was a good example to just highlight the different ways in which a trade could go, the reasons that a particular trade is made at that point, and then the waves of effects after that come from ensuing transactions, and how Juan Soto is connected to all of this through Michael King. So we'll get to that. But I guess the original transaction, and it's important in the narrative, this would have been, you've now, at this point of the transaction, it's 2018, I believe, or 2019, and you're already with the Marlins. So you've left a role with the Yankees to pursue a role with the Marlins, and in this role, you're at least involved in the trade discussions of, when you're discussing players for acquisition, you were in that loop, safe to say, right? So what stands out to you about why this deal in particular? So the deal is Michael King from the Marlins, drafted by the Marlins, outgoing, 7th round pick, you said? 9th round pick.
Or no, I think it was like a 12th round pick. Okay. Actually, I'll tell you right now.
A bit of a later pick, and that he gets traded for Garrett Cooper and Caleb Smith. Garrett Cooper goes on to have a prolonged role with the Marlins, and then turns into Ryan Weathers, and then Caleb Smith does the whole end around, involved in a Starling Marte trade that then results in the Jesus Luzardo trade with Oakland. So why does that first deal happen? Because I think it's more 40-man roster related than people realize.
Yeah. So I think that first one happens in part because I had the good fortune of just coming from New York and, good relationships with, folks in New York. And so it was easy to talk like very transparently with them about needs and vice versa. So
And the Yankees have notorious 40-man roster issues. They're always the team, one of the teams that I feel like their 40-man is always getting plucked from, because they have a huge intake process. They draft a lot of players. They sign a lot of players internationally. They traditionally have had a team at every affiliate of minor league baseball. So they had 2 complex level teams, 2 short season teams when that was a thing. So at the end of the day, everybody has 40 spots. So they have a big intake, good player development, but then only 40 spots. So their back end is always flipping. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's what you're referencing, right? Like they're always in this opportunistic mode of knowing that they have to churn out, they have to make transactions at the back end of the 40.
I think a lot of our more successful deals with the Marlins stem from that. And, at first there with the relationship with the Yankees just coming from there, it made for an easy conversation. But I think developing conversations across the league and being proactive about, taking an issue off their hands where they have too much of a good thing is an effort and, diligence, and it's a human endeavor. So I think, Nick Anderson, Jesus Sanchez, Xavier Edwards, a lot of these are kind of trying to get out in front of somebody else's roster issue to the extent that you can, and being the, happy recipient of talent that is otherwise hard to get. So New York at that time had a roster crunch like they normally do. They're very good at drafting and developing, so they end up in this position a lot.
And they sign free agents, right? So it's not like
True.
It's not like they have homegrown players, but they're also not afraid to sign free agents. So you kind of crunch in both directions.
Yep.
From the major league free agents, leading to guys that are talented and should be on 40-mans, just kind of left outside looking in with the Yankees, right?
Yep.
Is that where you'd say Cooper and Smith were?
Yeah, and then got to have some familiarity with them, with the Yankees. But Coop had always hit, right, and he had a fantastic career with the Marlins. He was an All-Star in 2022, maybe.
Yes, yep. I believe that's 2022.
And just a really, really good hitter with a really, really positive track record. So I was excited when the Yankees had acquired him
right
in New York. I was excited because he's just on paper, you're like, this guy's really exciting, right? This guy's a really well-rounded, good hitter. And
is that, to you, is that an obvious assessment, or is that more of an under-the-hood assessment?
Certain profiles I feel make you feel safer than others, and he always had like kind of low swing and miss with extra base type power, right? And that combination is one of those. Yeah, and he'd impact the ball, and he played in some places where that can be a little noisy, assessing kind of outward stats and some spots. But he, just a hitter with a very good track record, big physical, imposing player that limits swing and miss. And again, another big physical guy, tall player who limits swing and miss, with power potential. So good ingredients to play first base at the major league level, and gave the Marlins some really good years of first base at the major league level. And Caleb Smith was a player development, through the pipeline with the Yankees at that time. So just, seeing him pitch, really good change-up, deceptive fastball, and our pitching group coordinators really liked the player and the makeup of the player. So
I thought there was upside there, I remember. Or just like if he fills the middle of the zone up more, the stuff plays enough.
Yep.
So I remember that being the narrative. It's not he throws, like, his walk rates were something that could have moved in a better direction, but it's more like, hey, get your stuff in the middle of the zone. It all plays well. And he got to the big leagues and generated a lot of swing and miss right away.
Yeah,
one of the more interesting trade assets the Marlins ever possessed in terms of how often he was asked for and in how many different deals he was considered for.
No, they're really good. I mean, anybody who ultimately turns into Starling Marte has done something very well, and Caleb did some very good things for the Marlins to put everybody in that position.
Sure. So
let me ask you this real quick.
Go ahead.
Before we get off Caleb, you're on the development side in the New York Yankees, so you're seeing the development plan in process with Caleb, and then you move over and have the opportunity to kind of continue the development plan here, which is sort of a unique situation. How much did that play into the acquisition of a Caleb Smith that, you guys were on the development side and had the plan already in place for him that you could then continue with the Marlins?
I think it did, but they had the pitching at that time it was like Jordan Montgomery, Nestor, Caleb, like they were all so promising. Then there's so many like Gallegos. There's so many pitchers from that group that ended up being meaningful major league pitchers in one spot or another. So it was like the continuity definitely helped, but more than anything, you knew they had way too much of a good thing. I mean, they did an outstanding job identifying talent. The coordinators and folks there did a great job developing the pitchers there. And another time where you're just happy to be a recipient of something that, it's just a talented player, right? And usually those guys find their way onto rosters unless the organization is too crowded by their own good doing.
Right. So I guess the piece there that we haven't spoken about is Michael King, who if you watch this year's postseason, he's starting games for the Padres, like electric in the postseason, really good stuff. And he's obviously one of the ways in which the Yankees acquired Soto. So it's kind of the trade that keeps on giving in that way. But what did you feel was outgoing at the time? Like if you could put yourself back into that time and space.
I love small trades that blossom into big deals, and getting Marte and Luzardo and Weathers, these guys down the road. That's all fantastic. I think it's a little bit deceiving to say small trade when you have a player that ends up being that good going out the door. So it's you normally don't want to send guys like that out the door. The Yankees did a great job identifying him.
Shout out Stan Meek and that group who drafted Michael King. But
But I only
did they poke right at him? You feel like it was like
I want to say they did, and I think they had just word of mouth stuff of like biomechanical aspirations.
Because they were out in front of a lot of that, right?
Yeah, and they tend to be. So I think
pioneering player development concepts. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he was a young pitcher who threw strikes. I think stuff wise, it wasn't in place at that moment, and they did a great job projecting stuff for a player who.
So they would have probably been in on fastball movement, like heavy at that point, like, and he would have stood out as somebody with underlying characteristics.
But I actually don't think he did on that piece, which kind of softened at least my personal perspective on the player. But there's other
more passable to like you can get behind that deal a little easier if you feel you're not. This isn't a great fastball movement profile.
Yeah, but there's other ways to project, and I think biomechanically they were projecting really well. And then he winds up developing a two-seam fastball that is, something you see in the playoffs.
Right.
You saw throughout the playoffs that he can put it where he wants, and it's pretty devastating. So good pitcher. Yeah,
interesting. What I remember from that is like the ebb and flow of like where you feel. Not who's on the better end of this deal, but where the value spectrum or the continuum goes. Because right now he's pitching in the playoffs. You're like, well, I guess the Padres won that deal, but like it's more complex than that. And I think that second part, which is the Caleb Smith, that turning into Starling Marte, to me, in all my time in baseball, that has to be one of my favorite deals that came together, because I remember very specifically throwing it out there as a concept and it feeling so ridiculous. Like, how could we be able to access this player? And then you kind of give up on the concept, and then the deadline era comes around, and that was the 2020 COVID season, which we can get into some of the ridiculousness of that transaction roller coaster. But a deal comes together at the end that seemingly shouldn't have, and Caleb Smith is in a position to be a primary piece in a 3-for-1 deal.
Yeah, that might be right.
3 players outgoing, Humberto Mejia and Julio Frias, I remember. And then Starling Marte, which at that time was a group, what we would call an elite level player, maybe not like a Hall of Fame type slam dunk, but like an elite level performing player with all the positive makeup factors, and just like would have been like a game changer for the team. But what I remember specifically was we were in the deadline room and we were watching Trevor Rogers face the Mets that day, facing DeGrom. And basically, if you lose that game, your playoff odds flipped.
Yeah, like those games counted as 3.
Yeah, those games counted as 3 at the time. And Trevor pitches his ass off, has like the best start of the year, beats DeGrom in New York, and gives us enough like mojo in the room to feel like we can make the press and to take on a player who had significant salary attached to him, which was part of walking it back with the Diamondbacks. Like, they were in a position where they weren't like gonna go anywhere that season, and he had future financial commitments that were just enough for the Marlins to feel comfortable taking on. So it's just like a perfect storm of things that came together.
Well, one thing before you can get off that financial part, going back and looking at that, I understand that Arizona, the owner, was one of the biggest ones complaining about COVID and the financial impact that COVID had on his organization.
I don't remember that.
This was at the time. He was vocal saying this really messed up our finances, not having fans in the seats. Yeah. So I don't know if that played a role on the Arizona side trying to get off that money.
Sometimes all you need is just an opening, and that's what I could say about trades generally. Like just enough of an opening, and everybody has different contexts. Like they're in a different cycle in their whole process, whereas the Marlins were, for the first time in a long time, in a buying position. And Caleb Smith ends up being the if you divided it into a pie, he took up the majority of that value in that deal. And Starling Marte comes in and is immediately, I remember looking at Dan and be like, oh, so this is what, an elite level player does when he gets injected into your lineup. He came in that night, the next game, and hit like the biggest home run of the year to win the game. And then that was like enough momentum in a 60-game season to carry you into the postseason. And then I remember equally when he got hit and broke his hand in the playoffs. It was like Tua going down for the Dolphins, where it was just like all the wind you had behind your sails just like snapped. And as good as you felt going into that series with Atlanta, like without Marte in that lineup, it was like it's like the one guy. Yeah, it was devastating. So, and then for Marte, connecting it to today, different teams and different scenarios, the Marlins season in 22 had gone a way that they didn't want it to go, and there were sellers at the deadline, and Oakland was in a buying position. And so they got put into this situation where kind of like best value on our team versus best value in their organization. And the window was just open just enough, and they needed him just enough that deal gets made on a 1-for-1 for Luzardo. And that's how Luzardo's a Marlin.
And I want to stay on that, just kind of this is like classic fan stuff, right? You go to MLB Network, these are the buyers.
Yeah.
These are the sellers. From an internal perspective, let's start with the buyer side, the first part of the Marte trade, right? When you get him. What does that look like inside where you say, okay, you mentioned the game that gave some juice to the room, but more specifically, obviously, there's an ownership element to all this. How does that work internally when you say, okay, we are going to be buyers, and people like you, Dan, have to look from that perspective outward? How's that happen? Like, what does it look like?
It's the answer to that is so comprehensive, and then in a deal like that where there are financial implications considered, especially future financial implications, you have to wrap in your ownership. You have to be pretty vertically integrated, and I can shout out Mike Hill, always like kind of really good communication flow up and down, talking to the ownership group at the time, and like he has to be keeping in touch with them to be able to give a green light at which like these trades happen fast. I remember Jesus Sanchez with like no time on the clock. A lot of other deals that happen with like impossible amount of time to do medical and all these things, so you have to be integrated. And I think in that case, there was like a green light to take on future money. There was a green light from the scouting side on this is the player we want. And then there was a green light from the development side on these are the players we're begrudgingly comfortable enough giving as the give. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I mean, are you always kind of like from your seat when you guys are in the acquisition role, are you always saying if we are buyers, as you look at the team and you see how it's going. If we are buyers, these are the guys we kind of want to target and then wait for the thumbs up, or how does that work from your seat as a potential buyer?
Yeah, definitely a lot of like allocation of resources towards one population or the other as you lead up to the deadline. Scouts and focus on if it's clear you're going to be one way or the other, you're focused on more major league talent or prospect talent. So sometimes when you're kind of in between, you're looking at outward playoff odds, internal playoff odds, trying to figure out, what are we more likely to be, and then assessing your own, opinions of the club about, your chances of winning over those next two months and change. So, but those are the positions where you got to be prepared for both, and you do some hybrid type stuff of, subtract and buy, and you've seen more and more clubs kind of play that game a little bit, trying to give their club a better chance with some maybe better fits, while also like being cognizant of the future.
On the other side, the sell part of it, same thing. Like once you start seeing it kind of slip away, you're looking at teams that might be in the hunt or maybe desperate because of whatever situation that their franchise is in, and say these are the guys we want to focus on.
Yeah.
I say you make a lot. The majority of the trades you make with yourself, and they never happen. You make in the room that you're in, and they never end up coming close to happening. But it's kind of like this consistent pushing of like, is this ridiculous? Is this too much to ask? Is this being piggish? Is this so you shut down or encourage a lot of deals in the room that get very different feedback when you give it to the other team, and it's all varying. So I guess what stands out is making trades, especially, is so hard. Like trades have to, they're difficult. A lot of things have to align on both sides for them to happen. And you never know how many other parties that team is talking to on a similar concept. And they know that there's a rate of attrition. So they could be talking to 4 teams on one concept, and it's kind of like the first one we line up on, knowing we don't have much time, that's the way it's going to go, as opposed to this would have been the actual best fit. But it's, I don't know, it's so multi-tiered, and then there's free agency is a whole different beast too. So like you can have the best free agent lists of players. This is like the best fits for what these guys can move the needle the most for our team. They have to want you back too. And you have to still compete with the rest of the market. So it's so multidimensional. You can like and want a certain pocket of players, but there has to be a reciprocation of your ability to get them and they're wanting to play for your organization if they're free agents.
Do you guys like scout organizations? What I mean by that is you scout the players that are on the roster. You scout amateur. Do you like know like, hey, this organization is more inclined to give us this type of player that we value more than what they might value, or this owner is going to be desperate to win now, so maybe we can kind of get some more out of him? Like, how much of that is just knowledge of the organization that you'd be targeting for a potential trade?
I think this is where the value of your pro scouting department and your analytics shows up. Like when you, say you match up with the Mets or the Reds, or you feel based on internal discussion that the Reds or the Mets look like a likely partner, they've shown interest in this player that you have, I think that's where you start to go into your grouping of like, okay, who could we bucket into like in a Pablo Lopez context, and whoever else context, who are fits in their system that we would feel like we like. And then, I don't know, that's where the majority of the discussion and time goes, and just filtering through somebody's system to put guys in tiers that you could, okay, what about this 2-for-1? What about, would you do this for this? To even get to that point, you have to bracket things. And that bracketing, if you have a good pro scouting and analytics integration, you get to that bracketing quicker. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think teams are generally risk averse to, and, being able to talk transparently with the club is not the case with each club. So like having inroads with certain clubs and transaction histories with certain clubs allows you to maybe focus more time and resources on those clubs because you're more likely to deal. And there's a handful of clubs who just aren't very transactional, who are, maybe a little bit more difficult to communicate with and kind of get on the same page as. And it makes a little bit less sense to focus as much time and resources on those clubs. So you do pick and choose a little bit where you're going to spend your time and focus based on the likelihood you deal with somebody. And to your point, I think it can boil down to like the people on the other side of the aisle and how likely you are to line up with them.
Yeah, I told you this when we were in the prep, where I'd argue that Gallen and Chisholm, that deal opens the door to not too long after that to be able to make a Marte and Caleb Smith, because you already have a transaction history. And I think if you look back, like the Rays were one where we had frequent back and forth with, and at least Minnesota, frequent discussion with. So like it's almost like you kind of, if you see a fit, it's not that you go there first, but if you have kind of a well that's been, that you've gone there before and you feel there could be action there again, I feel like that influences how these deals come together, especially when the time is crunched. Like there's a deadline and there's a clock, and that's where that transaction history shows up the most, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The A's, you guys did the Blade Puck trade recently. Of course, the Luzardo trade. What did you guys see in Luzardo that you thought you could work with him and get him to maybe a position where he was projected to go not that much far back? Like, 2 years ago, it seemed like absurd that he'd be getting traded. Then it was a lot more likely, obviously, when you made the deal. Like, what did you see in him that made you think he could be the player that everybody originally thought he might be?
I mean, honestly, the player that everybody originally thought he might be was really relevant, right? Like, because he had broken his hand, I think, that offseason playing video games. And then all players in baseball, I think around that time, were dealing with like sticky stuff, speculation. So anybody struggling at that moment is like, well,
right.
how much is this involved? And I think models generally don't do great with black swan events. Like, this is something that like suddenly is a big part of the game. Nobody can properly account for it, and it becomes part of the discussion. But kind of seeing past all that with a player who has always been good, always threw strikes, super athletic, plus makeup, and all these like really positive factors didn't happen to be helping Oakland at that time, and they were clearly going for it, right? And so I think bounce back players sometimes involve narratives, and seeing the legitimacy of that narrative, putting yourself in position to legitimize a narrative versus something that's just going to take you down the wrong road, was a big factor with him. And any other players kind of in that bounce back category, sometimes they're just deviating from the course for 2 seconds, and that's the only time you'll ever be able to get them. And this was a case where I think it was probably the only time you could get him before he got going in the major leagues.
Yeah, it's like the door creaks open just enough with the right amount of pressure for them to make the postseason, and the right amount of asset on our end with Starling Marte. It was like the one free agent at the deadline that you can upgrade with, and he did upgrade that team significantly, as he would any team that he's on. But he was such an interesting example of exactly what you said. Like, if you follow the history of where he was on his trajectory, just maybe had like a valley year in his, like, in the up and down of it, and it was just enough at the right amount of time with the right asset on the other end to complete a transaction that, he's anchoring their rotation now, one of the better left-handed pitchers in baseball. But there was some that wasn't like such a slam dunk. I remember of, we're going to get this once we get Luzardo. It was a little more of a question mark. Will this come back at the rate at which, we expect it to, right? And there was an injury there, but so there's things that you had to get through. But I got to credit a lot to, like, Mel Stoudemire, Scott Aldred, like the guys that kept Luzardo going on track, and Jesus himself, right? He's a beast, man. I love watching.
I think that was a common theme for sure. Was if you acquired pitching, you had a pretty good chance it was going to work out. If the talent was there and you sent it to Scott and Mel, like, that's a pretty good formula, and something that I think was leaned into more and more over time.
Was the Weathers trade for Garrett Cooper an example of that?
I mean, not that dissimilarly situated from Luzardo, in that, like, he was still 23 years old. He had pitched in the playoffs, debuted in the playoffs, but after a couple rocky seasons in AAA, like, that's old news. But, like, you zoom out a little bit, you're 23, you sit mid-90s, you're left-handed, you're super athletic. Yeah, I mean, it's I think that's every single front office has been in the position of, I had really high hopes for this player, and I keep trying to tell myself that this is, and the fan base has given up long before you, and you're like, this should work, so it will work, but you just can't keep it going anymore. And
the fatigue is real.
Yeah, and then another team, like, kind of takes the bet on the same player, and then it works out. And we've been on the other end of that, I think. It goes all ways, but being on the other end of somebody's prospect fatigue is definitely and not saying that there was prospect fatigue, but just like that, that word, but being on the other end of, like, the player has endured a bump in the road, but it should work, I think, is a pretty good formula generally.
Yeah. So I'm interested in your take on this. I felt that evaluating pitching on the whole, like, comprehensively, was not easier, but just felt more straightforward when you're evaluating the pitcher based on all the TrackMan data that we have, all the pitch movements that we have, all the biomechanical stuff, that seems like more of a finished evaluation by the time you're making it, as opposed to what you and I were just talking about, was how hard it's gotten to hit in the major leagues. That's why the really great ones stand out. Like, do you see a gap there in ability to feel like there's a more sturdy evaluation on the pitching end than the maybe more subjective hitting end?
Yeah, I feel like we definitely felt that way, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like we viewed pitching as more level agnostic. It's not reactionary. It's what's coming out of your hand, even if you're on a minor league mound wearing a high A uniform or whatever it is whatever's coming out of your hand's coming out of your hand, right?
What's coming across the plate is what's coming across the plate.
Yeah, and there's major league quality stuff on minor league mounds and even college mounds, more frequently than we probably think.
Where you can replicate similar exit velos and similar angles in a minor league setting that are major league quality or level, but then you try to translate that the same, and it's just not.
Yeah, you got to react to higher caliber stuff, whereas a pitcher's not reacting to anything. He initiates the action, and so I do think that makes for a much more objective evaluation, and I think I don't know, arguably a simpler evaluation, which we leaned into for a lot of pitching transactions.
That's why since I've been working in baseball, I've put a premium on the value of teams that get it, that have offensive identity and culture, that they intake good hitters, or good hitters come into their organization and take steps forward. I have such a deep level appreciation for those teams that do that well, because it feels very, very difficult to impact the baseball right now when everything a pitcher is trying to do, buoyed by all the data that they have, is specifically targeted to get off your barrel, to basically miss your barrel. And I don't think that the tech can catch up at nearly a rate to make that not a fair fight, right? Because there's still we're seeing offensive performers. But I think that speaks to how freakish some of these guys are. I think hitting has gotten significantly harder because of this. Attacking, that vertical plane that didn't used to get attacked the way it does now, or that, now those bastard sinkers that you're seeing now, it's swung around from, love of four-seam elevation to now, bowling ball sinkers, like that Yankee bullpen, for example. They have both, but there's such a targeted approach to get off that barrel. I don't know that hitting on the other end is in a position to target pitching that way. There's so many more factors involved. So to me, it's really hard to hit at the major league level right now. Really, really difficult. That's what I'll circle.
Let me ask you on the hitting versus the pitching. To me, the classic trade, this is like a trade that my son would make with baseball cards or on a video game, but doesn't happen as often in real life, which is Arias for Pablo Lopez, right? High-performing pitcher at the major league level, high-performing hitter at the major league level. They're both Venezuelan, and they both ended up making the playoffs last year, so it worked out for both teams in that way. You being technically on the analytics side, Arias doesn't always get the best reputation with that community, at least in the public, right? Not in the team.
Just from an average
Just from a
standpoint.
fan standpoint, it's like you associate him as an old school guy, not so much an analytics guy. What was it about Arias that made you feel comfortable that, hey, this is a guy that can help us make the playoffs and give up a player of the caliber of Pablo Lopez?
Where's Hottie Rod?
Yeah. I mean, I think Arias is. I want to say he was nearly a 4-WAR player for us last year. So this notion of kind of sneaky, not valuable, it's batting average. It's to me super misguided. He's a super effective hitter. He has always hit, and then he was playing injured this year, notably, and I don't know the extent to which that affected maybe not his best season production wise, but no, he has always hit, and I think typecasting players, if you don't meet a certain power threshold, you are doomed in some sense, is somewhat true. 99 or 98% of players in the major leagues who are well above average hitters meet that power threshold, but there are exceptions, and they're not super common, but this player has been a big fat exception to that, and being, having the best hit ability in the past 10 plus years, or, maybe more. Stephen Kwan is, not so far off that mold. So our analytics group one time ran a projection model for all prospects in the game. And it was updating that model, and I think it showed Stephen Kwan as the 8th best prospect in baseball or something. I sent it back like bad soup. I was like, nobody will take this seriously. this guy's stature and this guy's lack of power. But you learn over time, like, there are healthy prejudices, but you still have to have your eyes open to guys who are truly exceptional at something, because they do have a lot of like true value in the major leagues. And I think Arias has established that. And obviously so has Quan. So super stable hitter. And I think you never want to trade away Pablo Lopez. Nobody with the Marlins wanted to trade. That's 80 makeup,
That is.
Tremendous pitcher, like unbelievable human being.
Exactly the type of pitcher that would go, and at anywhere he would have gone, he would have continued to take steps forward, because if, he's just to the 80 makeup, but also 80 like learner and preparer, and like he's how you draw it up. If you're investing money in a starting pitcher to pitch for your organization, he's one of those guys. So it's ultimate example of, perhaps dealing from strength that you've built up on the pitching end to acquire something that you're not having the same kind of success developing on the offensive end. Like the pitching allows you to access the high level hitter, and it's a moment of just shout out Luis Arias and an appreciation moment, because it isn't, to me, his is an average argument. He happens to have a high average, but he also just makes really good contact at a lot of really good angles at a really high frequency, about as high as anybody. Just because there's a power gap doesn't mean that there's a hit tool gap between him and too many other guys. I don't know that he isn't the best pure hit tool in the game. I think that's a good argument. So, and the fact that regardless of the extra bases, that can be valuable to any lineup. He just went to San Diego and helped them go on and make a run, and came to us and did the same thing from multiple spots in the lineup, at the top of it, and the 2-hole, even sometimes in the 4-hole. Like, even if it's not an extra base hit, sometimes that ability to get on base and to get that big hit is what you need, especially in the team starving for offense. Like I felt that club was. Yeah. It was a nice jolt of it. So
you tell his value when he couldn't even walk, and he still helped you make the playoffs, right? With that, that's something that I remember as a fan forever, when he limped out to first base. So something you can't really capture in a model. You mentioned the pitching strength and how that got developed. You were part of. I can't imagine there's too many trades where you acquire 2 ace pitchers, legitimate major league ace pitchers in one trade, which was the Ozuna trade, getting a Sandy Alcantara, getting Zach Gallen, Mag Sierra as the hitting piece of that. But those two, really 2 different kind of sides of the coin there, very different profiles. Just starting with Sandy, from seeing him from when you acquired him to what he became, what did you, just take us through that process and what you learned about what you do now, evaluating players, from seeing Sandy's process.
Yeah, so Sandy and Gallen come in the same package was, 2 totally different species. And, at that point in my career, I was much more acclimated to the pitch characteristic, under the hood stuff that I think Gallen popped in a huge way. And so Sandy was kind of on the other end. It was the pitch characteristic stuff was just okay. Like the strikes were not as good, the strike throwing. So, but the body was tremendous. The upside to the player was almost infinite, right? But that's harder to see with the snapshot of that player in the moment than it was for Gallen. So you had folks who would, I would have probably called, if Gallen was a third piece, in my mind, he's the one piece, right? And vice versa, maybe with Sandy, but Sandy's another. You learn a lot from Sandy, that's another intersection of plus makeup with massive physical tools delivered to a pitching coach who's getting the most out of players. And you get all these factors that mingle together to result in something that was way beyond what I was able to imagine. Michael Hill did a great job on that. I think he saw him in the fall league, and he was, the
scouting pick sometimes works.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a balance to this, because I feel if there's something that stands out from this deal, it's like a balanced approach where you're hedging your return. It's a really good player outgoing, and you're trying to build your pitching depth, and you go with one scouting pick, that was probably had some analytical buoying, but another one that was maybe more driven by the under the hood characteristics in Gallen, and both net out to be high level, ace level pitchers for their individual organizations, but for different reasons. You show up as a scout and you see Sandy Alcantara, you're filling in a big report, and you might fill out a good report for Gallen, but there's a lot there in that evaluation that isn't what your eyes are seeing. Maybe you can say, oh, I'm seeing extra ride on that fastball, but you really have to have access to the TrackMan data on all his pitches to really appreciate the value of a Zach Gallen, beyond just like watching him pitch on a given day.
And what was it about Gallen that had you, because look, you said you had him at 1. That was a good projection because he's a 1 in any other trade. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball. What did you see with him that allowed you to see him different than maybe others saw him?
Yeah, I think, that's that point in time, that's 2018, and I don't think all clubs are totally up to speed at that moment on, pitch characteristics, especially, pitch shapes that are more advantageous than others on your fastball or otherwise. So I think we would have graded out and did grade out his stuff very highly, even though velocities were, I think at that time, 91, 92, much higher expectation for these pitches to play than their velocities or, what you might grade in the park. So a lot of spin and unexpected movement from slots and all that kind of stuff that has become more baked into everybody's evaluation of a pitcher today.
Right.
Was the velocity a surprise as it grew, or is that something that you guys projected at the time?
I don't think we did see the player as like mid, that didn't need to be as much a part of the evaluation for us to really, really like him because the characteristics were really good and the strike throwing was really good. So that was kind of a cherry on top that turns him into a Cy Young caliber pitcher.
And then he goes and proves it at the big league level right when he gets there that stuff plays. So it's like the velo uptick, I'll say, is what needs to happen in order for him to graduate from that. Okay, you can get by with 91, 92 with good qualities, but like the moment you make that mid-90s, now you put yourself in an ace conversation because of all the other underlying stuff. Huge fan of Zach Gallen. It was really interesting during that cycle watching how excited the industry could get about a potentially available arm. Like how like the moment it was at least hinted that we were open to discussing like the scramble to like be able to be a part of that discussion speaks to what you're saying, right? Things that are more baked in throughout the rest of the league. Mm-hmm. That like once that asset is theoretically available or priable, then it's worth checking in on because, each team might think like, oh, we really value him here versus maybe general industry has him in a different place.
Now, I know that's a big part of analytics is just thinking differently and challenging conventional norms. Obviously, you're with a lawyer background. Your background is unconventional. As we sit here today in 2024, you're talking about 2018, which is now conventional wisdom. Is there like a sacred cow or something you believe in 2024? I don't want to get you in trouble or say too much, but just something that maybe you're, Dan Greenlee feels strongly that people are looking at the wrong way.
No, I don't feel that way. I guess the most controversial take I might have is that by 2030, through poaching, independent analytics firms, and that we're all kind of dealing with the same raw set of ingredients to begin with the skeletal data. It's an enormous amount of data. It is. And making use of it to its full extent is an enormous undertaking that clubs are in very varying degrees along in that process. But I do wonder if by 2030, the advantages will be less from the projection models themselves than deep productive deviations from them. So are you still in a position to evaluate a player's background? Are you still in a position to evaluate a player's player development, where that player is at? And is that a persuasive case that he's going to be better than your projection system? Because these systems might become pretty homogenous, and your ability to access players who deviate from the system in a convincing but like legitimate way become highly accessible. So that's probably the most controversial take I have, and it skips 3 steps to get there because you got to get there. Everybody's got to get to the R&D mountaintop, but I do think the hay to be made might be a little bit old-fashioned. And are you still doing your homework on players? Do you have a flexible mind? Do you understand that this player placed in AA at 28, although seemingly doomed by by those ingredients might not be, because you still you aren't on autopilot. You're still eyes wide open.
I think it's another way of saying a version of that is like this thing always, which I like, it always circles back to the human elements of baseball, or the human element, period. And I think we will cycle in and out of these things. And I think we have, where we are in the cycle is a hyper model, hyper data-driven approach to almost every process. And I think that falls a little flat with the humans actually doing the things sometimes. I think even the ones working in some of these offices might wish that we weren't so like model, okay, the model says this, so we do this. Like where is the fun and the human subjectivity to it? And I think that we'll keep seeing this correction. But I think it's what Dan's saying, like, right? Like we're getting to a point where how much more ahead of the game can you be information-wise relative to how you can apply that information? It's like, yeah, you can have the information gap, but like still human being, 24-year-old from wherever in the country, has to absorb that information and then leverage that information in a major league game. Like that's a whole other thing that it's still very human. So like those organizations that chew this or position it so that it's palatable to that human being, I think are the ones that in 2030 are going to be the ones that are in the postseason and ahead of the curve. Like the integrating the human element to me will never be lost in this.
Is that what the outside misses on analytics? Because analytics is something now that Brad Pitt's in movies about it. The average fan knows a little, right? Or even more than a little. What is that type of fan missing about analytics that thinks they know about it, but they don't see behind the curtain?
I mean, it is omnipresent. It tracks every joint and every limb of every player at every level. And like, it is everywhere. And you can transition all those things into very standardized metrics that like define almost anything about anything physical about a player at any point in time. And most teams have, so it's like, I think the analytics piece we talk about, batting average versus other things, publicly, but like the every single movement of a human being is being tracked by these cameras everywhere. And it allows you to get to a very, very precise physical view of the player in that moment in time, right? And to me, it becomes so powerful that you can almost blindly follow it, and I think that's the temptation is like with any algorithm is like, this thing is more powerful than human judgment. This thing is more powerful than all of us, right? So then you kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit in all these other areas. And I think that's how I view analytics is it's even more powerful and it's even a bigger driver to decision-making than I mean, it's up there with any industry in the United States in my mind.
Yeah, and you're pressured, not only that, but like you're pressured to be, like always be better in this analytic space. Mm-hmm. The bar is never like, okay, we built our analytics department 10 years ago. Like, no, every analytics department is kind of pushing to be, top of that food chain. So it's always, that 1% that wasn't is always kind of crunching down to be more model-driven and more, buoyed by that. But I will say there are windows for that subjectivity to play, right? Like the Tanner Scott stands out to me because the stuff, everybody has a TrackMan unit or a TrackMan readers evaluation sets to say like, okay, this is some of the best stuff in baseball, but the control numbers are not viable in a major league setting. So like while everything pointed to some of the best stuff in the game, swing and miss, you don't actually know how much better Tanner Scott's going to get between the ears, whatever you want to call it, to actually harness that into strikes that are now, some of the best stuff in all of baseball. I mean, this guy he's going to make some money, Yeah. And like when we were talking about him, it was like, do we even want to acquire this? Because, it doesn't really fit the bullpen profile that we're trying to build. It was a kind of like a strikes dominant bullpen, but he would have been the stuff addition to that bullpen. And I think, again, that's to me another Mel Stoudemire like shout out, like to be able to harness that raw stuff into not only a usable major league product, but a dominant major league product that then turns into one of the better assets, trade assets this past deadline. But to me, that's not, data doesn't get you and improve that player. Those are human processes that net out an all-star reliever.
And you end up getting another faded prospect, right, in Snelling. That's who's right. You don't get him when he's at his peak value. So it's kind of history repeating itself with the development piece and then getting someone in. Yeah. You mentioned that everything is tracked and there's data and modeling for everything. I think there's one exception that I could say, which is a global pandemic that puts everybody in a bubble and changes the whole way you go about putting a team together. You guys put together a playoff team during the pandemic. I don't even know where to start on this, but I guess I'll start with you, Dan, as far as just where you were when this happened and how it impacted you just in your baseball job.
Yeah, we were in Philadelphia, I think the Rittenhouse Hotel, and we were told to go home from the park. We've got a couple positives, and it turned into a ton of positives, and people delivering food in hazmat suits, and just, I mean, you see yourself on the news that people did all these like scandalous things to, catch this. And the Marlins were front and center. And I was spending time in a hotel room, as were others in their rooms in isolation, trying to get, many, many bodies to be able to continue playing baseball, because we knew that we're going to have a lot of guys on the shelf. And it was unlike any other experience in my life. We practiced at UPenn coming out of, I don't know if you arranged that.
Shout out Penn Baseball. Yes, I did arrange that.
Yeah.
A workout at the University of Pennsylvania, because it was like the first time the guys could get outside and go somewhere. And I think I remember the pictures were like, they hadn't cut the grass in a while, and like all shin high, but everything had shut down. It's such a weird portal into that time. Everything was shut down, and that was the one place that was local that they could work out at. So it's this major league team working out at a college field. But they've since redone their field. It's beautiful now, but that was at the back end of their old field. So I'm sure it didn't feel super pro to those.
I mean, although everybody was just so excited to see sunlight. It had been, I don't know what it was, 11 days or 9 to 12 days, something like that. But yeah, I mean, the players, I think the most interesting part of that personally was, you're acquiring players and there's no visibility of the alternate site whatsoever. And there's no visibility. There is no minor league baseball. Right. There's no, if you're going to acquire a player, like this is a moment in time where this player is coming to you and you just cross your fingers. Like you have no information, right? So one of my I guess the most entertaining acquisition for me and one of the most amazing stories that could have its own documentary was James Hoyt, who
Big Game James
over time became referred to as Big Game James. He had come to us from Cleveland for I think $100K in our moment of need. We just needed pitchers.
Did we go down 13? We were minus 13 on the roster, and we needed to add 13.
Yeah,
I think it was 13 players in a short amount of time to field a major league team.
I think that's right.
And so it was like the waiver wire, like who is available in pitching.
Yep.
And healthy that could show up in where we were going to Baltimore. Yeah, I think it was going to Baltimore.
Yeah. Yep. And we did some traditional trades. We got Richard Blyer in that little window right there as more of like a straight up trade. Somebody we could get our hands on. But
Jonathan Villar.
Yeah, but I think Hoyt was DFA'd, but he was like sitting 94, 95 per our most recent information, which was like the year before.
2 months old, or?
I mean, I don't know when it was from. I know it wasn't current because like nothing was current. So we
started and stopped. So everybody had a little window to watch spring training.
Maybe that's what it was.
Stopped. So there was some information, some base to make information off, but everything was, to your point, from the year before. And he was 93, 94.
We think he's 90. Yeah, we think he's sitting 94. So we're like, whoa, thank goodness, this fell into our laps. We need this guy more than ever. So
really good slider characteristics.
Yeah. So we go to Baltimore. And I remember sitting down there with like Joey Nero, and I'm sitting down in the bubble printing sheets and doing all hands on deck. And I think Hoyt goes out in that doubleheader in like the 8th inning, like a key spot. I mean, you see up on the screen, you got your mask, you see up on the screen, it like comes out and it's like 87. And you're like, oh, that looks pretty straight. That's not the fastball, is it? And like the next pitch is 86 or whatever. And you're like, oh no, because you had no idea what's going on the mound. Like this, this guy's...
You had no visibility into what was happening.
Zero. But the magical part of this acquisition is he is 86, 87 or whatever he is. And Mel, I remember being like, yeah, but I like that slider. And it's like, no, like it's 86, 87. Like this is a wash. Like we botched this. And sorry, and he's like, I think this could work. And it did. It did all.
He was the 7th inning guy through that whole run.
Yeah, and Mel would say, like, he's good for 13 pitches, no more, 13. And it's like, that's a massive roster constriction. But he would come in, and it'd be the biggest 13 pitches of the game.
Ozuna. I remember
Ozuna, bases loaded.
And those Braves, and you're like, oh, God, what's going to happen
and
here?
He just ripped 3 sliders, and then you just see the guy walk back to the dugout. And you're like, how is this even happening? It was really a magical performance, all things considered. And just completely unexpected, improbable, and was just characteristic of the whole time right there. It was just amazing.
And there's so many names in that run of players that that were those emergency acquisitions to then. I remember we won 3 straight in Baltimore to feel like out of all those transactions, you start good out the gate, and it's a short season, it is. And yeah, it was a 60-game season, but the uphill climb to just field a roster first, to then, be able to sneak into the playoffs and have a good run. The Starling Marte deal in the middle of all that injects adrenaline. But then there's a lot of good things that happened, right? Like Sixto Sanchez. I feel like I wish people could just lock in on 2020 and what we saw from Sixto Sanchez being inside that bubble. That was one of the best pitchers in the sport, right? And, things have gone a different direction now, but there were a lot of stories in that year. Jesus Aguilar, Garrett Cooper, Miguel Rojas, rookie Jazz Chisholms. I remember Monte Harrison being one of the most interesting weapons, late game replacement weapons in all of baseball. For a short amount of time that we got to see it, it was amazing. Like, all-world defender, so you could defend in center field at any point but then would come in and it would be second and third were stolen, right? In this era before we started stealing more bags. So there was a lot of unheralded guys. Yimi Garcia was dominant during that run.
Yep.
60-game season, but I feel really good about that 60-game season.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite memories in all of baseball.
Well, your day-to-day job at that point, I mean, you were process people. This is what we do. What changed as far as what you were doing on a daily basis during that season?
So you only were allowed to have X number of people. So, right. While I was in the hotel, it was get player, need to get on the phone, get players, right? But when we got out and the season started, it was, you'd be handing out masks. I'd be printing. I think they barred video moments before the season. They said there's no video room, and players were not thrilled with this, right? So we did a makeshift hey, can we print mid-inning reports and how can we simulate the information you'd be getting from video? And this is a project that has to be done, and they banned video within days of the season. And so you're how can we react? And so I'm down there printing sheets. I got ink all over me. I'm
assistant GM, just printing, doing
running
IT,
stuff. It was a lot of hustle though. Yeah. But I think that's part of what made that season kind of special, right? Is definitely. All hands on deck, hustle, and Michael and Donnie, those guys did a great job with the us against the world, and it really was. For that, the COVID feeders. Criticism was really heavy, early.
Yeah, and got some heat early on there.
Yeah.
But then the same situation just happened to the Marlins first, but then it just kind of made its way through everybody. Everybody had a bunch of positive.
And take me to that a little bit. So for those who don't remember, the Marlins, the media will jump on something like that. Take me back to when that broke and what the, as much as you could tell us about what really happened and what was characterized accurately, maybe inaccurately about the media at that time.
I wasn't in the bubble at that point in time. My recollection of that time isn't good, but I remember just I remember exactly what I said. They were the first ones to have, reported positive tests, and so it was easy for all the attention to be focused on whatever may or may not happen. I don't know. I don't think there's much to substantiate that anything happened that was the reason that other things happened. But I guess it was fun for everybody to riff on for a little while. So
yeah, I think that was early COVID day. I mean, it was you must have done something wrong to have contracted this, right? And we had somebody have to go get a tie or whatever, and it's I went to the mall, and it's what have you done? Like,
Number
it's
one,
like,
yeah,
you know, like,
exactly.
it was so like,
Exactly.
I still have texts. I have texts from players, and I'll, text them when they're like leaving the organization or something. The last time I texted them was them asking, "Hey, can I go get coffee?" Because they had to ask permission at some point during this.
You were the reindeer.
Yeah,
You were
I got to
like
be
the-
like, yes, you can go get coffee. And it was just a remarkable time, an especially remarkable time in baseball, and especially for the Marlins, because we were in the thick of it.
It was great. It made for weird celebrations. I remember we like, it was like contained. In any other dynamic, you clinch the playoffs or you win a playoff series, and you're having a great night in that town. That night, everybody is like, excitement, and then you just go into your room and like you're not allowed to leave your room or interact with anybody else. It was weird. My favorite part was an empty Wrigley Field, winning that series at an empty Wrigley Field. And one thing I want to categorize here, because I don't want to give at all the impression that it's Dan and I in this room doing any of this. This is a collective of like 7 or 8 to 10 people that I would love to have here having this discussion with us, but that's not how this goes. So like that whole grouping of people, played like significant roles, whether it be pro scouting, player development integration, farm directors, pro scouting directors, VPs of scouting and development. It was I remember that feeling like we were like a baseball startup, and it was just like an all hands on deck effort just to field the team and then prepare for the team the next game and the next series. That one really stands out to me, not just because it's wacky, but just from a baseball standpoint, it was awesome.
The minor league component of it, how'd that impact your job?
On the
ATS,
alternate site, right?
The alternate site. That was such a thing to have to be managed, to kind of run this parallel practice squad, really, with no, it has to be only inter squads. You can't play other teams because of the cross, contamination component. So your player development group had to select a group of, how many guys was it at the alternate site? 40 guys?
I thought it was 40.
And
but
you're trying to, the rest of your minor leagues had been scrapped at that point in the season. So you're also trying to salvage the development of some of your prospects that aren't going to help your major league roster that year. But if you can only pick 40 guys, you're like, okay, well, let me hedge guys that are going to help the major league team and our best prospects. And some of those had to kind of cross over and play different roles. I think Devers was up more sooner than he was ready, things like that. So I don't know, shout out to everybody involved, and Jeff DeGrode and Gary Denbo and all those guys who kept the alternate site this, competitive environment to be able to transfer guys over. And we made however many transactions from the alternate site to go meet us on the road or to play with the big league team. So you have to keep that competition level up to be ready to be playing in a major league game. But doing that through scrimmages alone with injecting crowd noise and nobody's allowed on the premises, it was really weird. Really weird.
Were people aiming to get picked be on that side, or was it bad feelings that people were not selected? So did some people not want to be selected and say, hey, I'll see you next year? What was that like from a human element?
I don't remember anybody. I think you wanted to be on there because it was your only chance to be selected from. It was your only chance to be playing baseball, was to be in this. If you weren't on an active major league roster, you had to be in an alternate site. Just to know that your limbs are attached and you're throwing, you're in a throwing progression and things like that. So it was, you wanted to be on there, I thought. And I remember a lot of good prospect development stories during that time. That's Eddie Cabrera took a step forward, JJ Bleday, a lot of guys got, big league time being on that alternate site that, might have spent the year in A-ball somewhere,
Switching gears now, just in general, you come to the Marlins. You're now, how many years has it been? You came in 2018?
Yeah.
So 6 years of growth. You've had a kid, a lot to learn off the field. But just in terms of baseball, what's the biggest change in the way you view the game from when you started with the Marlins to right now?
Till right now, I think it's maybe coincided with the game itself, maybe with the technology, and you kind of learn to appreciate different profiles of players and stuff that, defense, versatility, some of these things kind of show themselves as more valuable than you thought early on. But I'd say maybe the even bigger is a culture component. I think you just saw over and over these past 6 years teams who visited the playoffs most frequently. Just really nice alignment, top down, really good culture, really good taking information, which is extraordinary and like super robust, successfully to players and like with the human touch. I think teams who have maintained all that through the data influx are ahead of everybody, even already, and maybe increasingly so. So I think that's something that like I look like at myself as like somebody who was like in a leadership position with the Marlins. Like, how can you have been better at like those pieces of it? Because I think it's something all teams who didn't enjoy the level of success that they hoped in a stretch can look to and feel like they could have done better.
Should the analysts themselves and just the people in the analytics department, just in the future, should they be more attuned to all the cultural stuff, or are they locked in on what their job is and then others put the puzzle together? Like, how does that work to just the more grunt level analytics people? Is that something that they need to be more attuned to, you think?
I think teams do it differently. I think some teams have such stability and like kind of longevity with some of their analysts, and there's such like a clear philosophy within the organization that there's no trouble with analysts talking directly to players. Like everybody's kind of on the same page. I think that's really difficult to achieve, and it takes a measure of stability and transparency and kind of this is our philosophy and that kind of thing. And otherwise you kind of have kind of stray bullets going around and stray thoughts, and they can conflict with what you're told 20 minutes later from a coach or analyst or somebody in a leadership position, whatever it is. So I think achieving that is easier said than done, but those that achieve that, like, they don't deal with those same issues. They're able to kind of have anybody talk to anybody, and it's the way of that organization.
You said something that's really stood out to me. I feel like it's a term I keep hearing in baseball now, which is alignment, right? Like the importance of alignment, especially as it relates to what you asked about culture, right? Because I believe culture is one of those things that is established top down, really, or at least an understanding that this is like we are aligned from the top down in how we view these things. And I think that's a lot easier said than done, because even when you have the right kind of ideas, you have to have everybody aligned to get behind those ideas and push them, especially when they get stress tested. So when an idea kind of gets stress tested, it's important to still maintain that alignment, even when the stress is maybe pointing toward you asking a question about this or evaluating that particular philosophy. But I think the organizations that maintain the integrity of that alignment, it's much more ingrained into how everybody thinks. There's a similar North Star that everybody's kind of working towards. And I think I'm glad you said that answer, because that feels really true, that I didn't understand the value of organizational alignment the way that I do now, 15 years later, watching, teams struggle through this. That, and you have to hit in today's day and age. You cannot be a strictly pitching and defense, like pitching and defense wins championships. It may in postseason baseball when things are magnified, but I feel that's the one thing from when I was younger. I thought, just get the best defensive alignment out there. No, I think, the Braves, the Phillies, like every year we were in this divisional race where I realized that the biggest gap that the Marlins didn't have was we didn't score enough runs. So you can't pitch and defend your way into sustained success, in my opinion. So answering your overall, what have I learned? You got to hit. You still got to pitch, but you got to hit.
One thing I've noticed, like with basketball, like the Miami Heat, they have certain things that are very fixed. The play style and the way they coach on the court and the way they maybe the type of player they acquire skill-wise can change with the rules and the way the game changes. What do you see as the biggest change going forward just on the field that teams may need to catch up to, keeping the same sort of philosophy but adjusting to the rules with the way they acquire players?
Adjusting to the new set of rules,
or just the changing of the game. Like what's the change in the type of player you acquire? Culture, let's assume it's fixed, but just the type of skill that you're acquiring.
Yeah, I think to me it does go back some to Adrian's point. So a little bit of like athletes also tend to be some of your better defenders, which is like the ability to defend is like identified, calculated, and appreciated probably more than ever. But the ability to hit at like a certain level that's like playable is that bar is higher than ever, I think, like as a skill set mechanically, because the pitching is just enormously challenging, right? So to me, like that's probably the biggest thing that has changed from like what you identify. Like, can you teach an athlete with like next to no like ingredients to hit, I think is probably a larger task than it was, you know, at prior times in baseball. So I think it does attract you to athletes still, yes, but athletes that, you know, are going to necessitate an even higher level of like present ingredients to hit, which are few and far between. It's like a pretty idealistic target, but I think those are the most promising players, and it involves a higher offensive baseline than as a skill than years past.
I think pitchers and catchers are chasing each other around the zone, right? So I think we went through this whole era of like riding fastballs up in the zone and hitters trying to match planes there. I think we'll see the Yankees, and I thought the Marlins, we were able to construct a bullpen back in those years of like sinker ball heavy guys because everybody was chasing rides, so sinkers were a little more. And I think like pitchers and hitters are going to chase each other around the zone. To now, you're seeing more of the return of the sinker being a much more prevalent plane where the ball's thrown. So hitters that are, you know, able to leverage that part of the zone will kind of cycle back around into being more valuable. So that's one of the ways in which I see it kind of evolving. I think they're chasing each other around a little bit. Pitching feels a little bit ahead right now. I'm putting them equal.
Listen, man, you've been awesome. We could talk all day, but
Yes,
appreciate you, Dan. This has been awesome, and thank you for 2020, man, and 2022-3. There's times I'll always remember as a Marlins fan. So again, appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And like Adrian said, it's, you know, there's a lot of people involved in making moves for the Marlins and development and identification and all of our past organizations. But it's I mean, the behind the curtain stuff is fun because like it really is like such an unbelievable experience. You're always grateful for to just be able to talk baseball, talk players, and it's a really, really enjoyable part of the job. So appreciate the extension of that here with you guys.
You have a standing invitation to be on here whenever you want. Like I said, some of the best conversations I've ever had the pleasure of being a part of. Not only were you in them, but I remember you consistently being the person, like when you would speak, you would think in this three-dimensionality that, you know, incorporates the 40-man roster, the depth of our system. Like you were always somebody that I kind of aspired to operate at that level. So to have you here as our first guest is an honor for me. And you're a personal friend, so it's even better. So I'm really excited we got this off the ground, man. It's really cool.
Yep, first pitch strike.
There we go.
That's what it's about.
See you guys.
And we're back.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dan Greenlee. We're going to be doing more of those, like working more of those conversations into the episodes at different points in time, while still maintaining a regular weekly schedule that will still be contemporary and topical, but we'll be able to zoom in and zoom out kind of as we like and as we see fit. So hope you enjoyed that conversation. This has been another really fun and really enjoyable process of filming L Big League Show. So please like and subscribe and follow the channel on 786 Sports. And we'll see you next week.